Hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of the Can You Hear Me, Can You See Me podcast. My name is Fatima Khan-Shah and I'm your West Yorkshire Inclusivity Champion, and I have got an absolute belter of an episode for you today, and we're going to jazz it up a little bit because quite right, in normal worlds not everybody is in the same place at the same time, so we've got a couple of colleagues joining us midway through the podcast, dialing in nationally to be a part of this conversation, because we're not just big in West Yorkshire, we're big nationally too. So I'm going to introduce you to our fantastic panel, and one of the first people that I want to introduce you to is somebody that I've been fangirling over for a really, really long time. She's an absolute inspiration, one of the first female Muslim chairs the NHS has seen, but apart from that, just a genuine, lovely human being, authentic leader and day-to-day inspiration. Selina, Ullah, welcome to the Can You Hear Me, Can You See Me podcast. Thanks for taking the time to join us and being a part of this really important conversation.
Thanks, Fatima. It's a great pleasure to be here. Can't believe that I'm on your show.
Well, it's going to be a big love-in today, guys. It's a big hug is what we're hoping for, that you feel when you finish listening or watching this podcast. Now, this next member of the panel is a lady that I've known for a really, really long time. She is a personal friend of mine, mentor, inspiration, and go-to person that I ring quite frequently when things are getting really tough. Kim Shutler is an absolute inspiration, CEO of a number of VCSE organisations and quite recently the Cellar Trust. She's also the VCSE representative on the NHS ICB board. But more than that, she's an absolute trendsetter, positive disruptor and advocate for the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. Kim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Fatima. Good to be here today.
Indeed, and you're both like wearing beautiful colours. It's like I didn't even need to tell you that as part of the webinar, because we're recording it, just bring a bit of light, a bit of colour in to the screen, so people at home watching could be like, oh, that's quite nice to look at as well as to listen to. So we're here today to talk about a topic that sometimes when people hear it, they get a bit of an eye roll, don't they? Because we're going to talk about resilience and the fact that being constantly resilient, is it a good thing or can it kill you? Because let's be honest, resilience is something that we're all digging deep for at the moment. It's been a really challenging time for the last couple of years. One of the things I did do, sadly enough, ladies, is I Googled it. I was like, so what does resilience actually mean? Because I hear it bandied about all the time. I'm sure you both have too. And it's about being able to bounce back in situations of challenge and being able to withstand adversity. Is that what you define resilience to be? I'm going to go to you first, Selina, because you look like you got something to say about this.
I think that is how resilience plays out, and it's how, as you say, it's our common understanding of it. But resilience, I think, is just a way of being sometimes. I think it's just about absorbing and being able to make the best of a bad situation. I think that's also part of resilience. It's about trying to look at the positives. It's about trying to learn from that experience. And it's about being in the moment, not fighting to change it, but just being in it and taking the best that you can from it.
What about you, Kim? How would you define resilience?
Well, I think it is that bounce back ability, but I've thought a lot about how that word, and that sometimes it can almost be a little bit weaponized, like, well, be more resilient. Let's go on a course about how to be more resilient. And what I hear from people is saying, well, give me a break here. Where's the we stretch people that, they bounce, but there's a limit. Like, we're human, and actually it's okay to feel like you're not really feeling very bouncy. Like, it's okay not to that you might actually normally feel that you're very resilient, but there's I suppose from a psychological perspective, you can stretch people so far and then their ability to bounce back changes, and I know we're going to talk about that today. So I suppose it depends how much of your life or how much time you're having to spend in that space where you are being stretched beyond your comfort zone, and what feels comfortable, and that and that will impact on your ability to bounce back and And you know, it depends what you've got in your toolkit. It's how topped up you are in terms of your own well-being will really massively impact on your ability to bounce back. So yes, I do agree with the definition, but sometimes it can be thrown around, I think, a bit unhelpfully.
And
Totally agree
I'm
with
really
you, Kim.
sorry, Selina, go on.
No, I just gonna say I totally agree with Kim. I think this notion of being resilient 24/7 is really misleading, and as you say, weaponize it against people. I think we have to acknowledge that we are human, you know, and humans have their ups and downs, and that's okay. And they are not going to be 100% all of the time. This expectation that we are always going to be 100% and always performing to 100% levels and beyond is actually not helpful. I think we have to say that there will be good days and bad days, and we will be the best depending on what the situation is. And more moving away from this expectation of resilience.
And I thought that's a really interesting point, because in the context of leadership, resilience is seen as a positive attribute in the main. And I remember sort of as part of my leadership journey, when I first started, it was something that wasn't, you know, the term was used a lot. And I associated being a good leader with someone who was okay all the time. And I wasn't okay all the time. I mean, when you start your journey to become a senior leader in any sector, it's really challenging, and there are highs and lows, right? And, you know, it'd be really great to hear both your stories, Selina and Kim, about your journeys of how you ended up where you are, because you're both massively inspirational figures. But there will have been times when you've had to be really resilient, and there have also been times where you've just been like, you know what, I have to look after myself. I am going to take a step back. I am going to do things slightly differently. And I remember during the first wave of COVID, actually, I was asked to do a bit of a video about resilience. And I remember thinking about it, going, you know what, I'm not going to do that video. I'm going to talk about the fact that I am so tired and I'm really struggling, and this feels really tough. And I really wrestled with it, but I had to be true to myself. So I did the video, and the response I got was amazing. Everyone was like, oh, thank you so much for saying what I was feeling, but I didn't have the courage to say. So there is something about how, yes, resilience is a term that we hear bandied about a lot. I also think we don't use it in the right context sometimes. But I agree with you, Kim. I think it's also used in a way that's inappropriate, and with an attribute that if you are sometimes not feeling very resilient, that there's something not right with you, which I think is fundamentally wrong, actually. But going back a few steps, Selina, in your journey for where you got to, which is, you know, a senior leadership role nationally in many forums, was resilience a part of your journey?
I probably never thought of it as resilient. I probably thought of it as being more around being determined, persistent, you know, not taking no for an answer, you know, trying again and again. As Kim knows, she sat on 2 interview panels for me, where she's been on the other side, and I've, you know, had to explain myself. So I think there's something about dogged determination rather than resilience, as my DNA. But others might see it as resilient, that the fact that even though I was knocked back, I carried on. And they may see that as resilience, but I just see it as being determined, having a goal, going for that, being true to myself, you know, and for me, I think resilience isn't something that I've actually ever focused on. What I have focused on is being me, being myself, and bringing my whole self to work if I can. Looking at how my values are aligned, because that's what gives me the energy. This is what gives me the motivation. This is what keeps me going. So it's looking at those drivers rather than thinking, oh, I'm not being very resilient today. Instead, I'm thinking, I'm not my best today.
Yeah.
You know, so
but I love that. I love that. I
Mm.
love the way that you're flipping it and you're owning it. and not defining it through the molds or the vision of someone else, but making it what it means for you and relevant to you, which is why I adore you in a variety of ways. Kim, there's an additional layer to this view because of the fact that you work and are, you know, a really well-respected leader in the sector of mental health. Do you think that having that additional lens of resilience being both a positive and sometimes challenging attribute can impact people in a different way?
So I was thinking as Selina was talking, and I think quite similarly in terms of my career and life, you know, I haven't really thought about myself as being resilient, although I think I probably am. I think I'm similar, really persistent and determined. I think, like Selina said, being really authentic to yourself is so important. But probably if I look back on my career, in the early stages of my career, and I had quite a big career change to come and work in the voluntary and community and social enterprise sector 9 years ago. I don't think I was my authentic self before, actually. You know, I didn't feel quite at home in the spaces that I was in, and it was fine. Like, my career was fine. I enjoyed it. I had, I did some good stuff, but I didn't quite feel myself quite at home in, really cheesy sense, not fulfilling, what I could see as, my wider purpose. So as I've got a bit older, being able to occupy that space where you can feel more like yourself, gives you, I think, a level of resilience. And and then I think after I had a big birthday last year, and I don't know whether it's that moment that you pause to reflect and think, actually, I can feel more at peace with who I am. And I was talking to another chief exec, another fantastic chief exec in the system, and she's saying the thing is that once you are a senior leader, it's a bit easier to be more yourself than it is when you're sort of going up. And I think that's, I'm really an advocate of the lift as you climb.
Absolutely.
And I hope that when I'm trying to support other leaders in the way I've been supported through my career, I try and emphasize that about, as much as you can, be your true self, because that when you are your true self, you are your best self, which probably means you're also more resilient, because you are congruent with your values, who you are. And even in the face of adversity, you can go home at night feeling, I've done my best, I've been myself, I've been true to my values, I've tried as hard as I possibly can. And that won't be good enough for everybody. That's the thing, is it never is. Not everybody, not everybody's going to like you, and I find that difficult. But if you can go to sleep at night knowing that, then you can be more at peace, and I think that's important for resilience.
You know what, you said something that really resonates with me, and I used to feel like this a lot when I first started my career journey. I think you and I have also discussed it, which is, it really matters to me that people like me. It really does. And I don't know where it comes from, but when I first started, I was really worried about upsetting people and being perceived in a certain way, or not meeting the expectations of others. And I do think that actually an element of being resilient is not really giving it the oxygen sometimes, because no matter how authentic you are or how good you are in the job, you're not going to be able to appease everyone. There will always be sometimes situations where you've tried your best, but you just can't deliver what that person actually wants, and that's okay. It's okay to disagree sometimes, but that used to really impact me, and I've had to really work hard on that as a leader, to go, you know what, that's okay. I can still be me despite that. Selina, you're smiling at me. Why are you smiling at me? Did you guess that already?
This need to be liked. I think as Asian women,
yes,
it is ingrained in us that we have to be the peacekeeper. We have to be, bring everybody together, make sure everybody's having a good time. We don't want conflict. We'll step in
and darling.
Yeah. So I think there's an element of us taking that into the workplace as well. And that means that sometimes we shut down our voice, because we don't want to be that person who creates a problem, and not be visible. So I think there is that element. But I think once you recognize it, it is really incumbent on you to be your authentic self.
Oh, yeah.
So for me, it's always been about the right thing to do. And I've had standing arguments with some of my bosses in the past, you know,
Well, I love
really,
it.
you know, shouting matches with them. But and they were male, I have to say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was easy to do that.
Yeah.
And we were fine afterwards, but because once we got each other, and where one of my bosses, who was notoriously known for being very difficult, actually was great with me, because we were very open with each other, and I'd tell him openly I disagreed with him, I didn't agree, you know, the approach, and he'd sort of say, well, tell me why, and we'd have this big Barney, and then he'll say, all right, okay, I see that, but can you see where I'm coming from? And I say, yeah, I can see where you're coming from, and I'll do this instead, you know. So we'd compromise, we'd get to that point.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, a really healthy relationship. And I think we're too scared sometimes to have a difference of opinion,
Yes.
thinking it's going to stop us from having that nice relationship. But what I've learned is that you can have a nice relationship, a respectful relationship with each other, and agree that you disagree on certain things, but you're not going to fall out. I'm not going to take my bat and ball home because somebody said, I don't agree with you. And I think so often that happens. And I think that's about maturity. It's about understanding behaviors in the workplace, that it's not personal, that actually this is about professional delivery of something. And there may be times that we have to disagree on the approach, but we want the same thing.
But isn't that healthy though? I mean, I do think we are losing that really important attribute, which is it's okay to disagree on stuff, but we need to respect each other's opinions, and we might meet a middle ground and we might not, but that's okay. I sometimes worry that we're moving into a space of, if you're not with us, you're against us, and that's really dangerous territory, because, you know, as a leader, I genuinely believe that you need to be around people that tell you what you need to know rather than what you want to hear. But I feel like now we're moving into the territory of everyone just says what you want to hear rather than rock the boat. So I love that story. So we're joined via our headquarters in London, our London studios, by Irving. Welcome to the Can You Hear Me, Can You See Me podcast. Can you introduce yourself to anyone who doesn't know who you are? Because I don't believe anyone does. But...
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me, Fatima. So yeah, I'm Irving. Apologies, I am full of cold this morning. And I'm the head of Improving Population Health with West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board Health and Care Partnership, and I'm also the Public Health Senior Lead for West Yorkshire Violence Reduction Partnership.
And you've joined at a really timely point in our conversation, because we were just exploring adversity, resilience, and the lenses of intersectionality. So being a woman, being an Asian woman, sometimes means that we experience this inner conflict of being pulled in two different directions, or that our journey and our lived experience enable us to operate in a certain way because we want to avoid conflict, we want to be liked, we want to appease everybody. And some of that is triggered by people's lived experience, right? And you're doing some amazing work on the impact of racial trauma and how people access services, which is nationally trend-setting, nationally recognised. And I'm so proud of you and Sarah Smith and the whole team behind that. I'm really mindful that your voice is a finite resource this morning, but if you could just share with us a little bit about what exactly is racial trauma, because we hear the term, but people don't fully understand what it means.
So I think to start with, it's important to focus on trauma and the impact of trauma. And trauma has a neurological and a physiological and a psychological impact on everybody that's experienced it. And that could be one significant event, or it could be cumulative trauma, and it can be historical trauma, and it can be intergenerational trauma. For children and young people that experience trauma, that impacts on the development of their brain. It can slow them down at school. It can mean that they fall behind their peers, they lose their confidence, they act out, they get labelled as bad. And the next thing you know, they're on a road to disadvantage, inequalities, and sometimes criminal justice and prison. For adults, where we've not been able to mitigate trauma, we've not been able to intervene early to help and do something different for them. We have our whole whole generation of adults facing multiple disadvantage and inequalities for different reasons. So trauma can impact on you at any point in your life, at any point in life course, including antenatally. When you then add racism on the top of that, what you've got is a whole generation and generation and generation of people that have been through trauma way, way beyond the generation that we have now. And that historical trauma is felt by generations now. Even if they didn't actually experience it, that historical trauma is there. And it causes that physiological, psychological, and neurological impact, just as any other trauma, neglect, abuse, etc. So for me, the intricacies of racism and trauma are recognising that this has a biological and a psychological impact. This isn't just something that makes somebody feel a bit unhappy or it's a bit unpleasant. It physically impacts on your body. It can make you ill, long-term conditions, diseases. And if we don't start to recognise that fact, then we're not really understanding the importance and the impact of reducing racism. So for me, this isn't an anti-racism campaign. I'm not in a position to be able to do that or even understand those experiences. But what I am in a position to do is talk about the impact of trauma. And racism is a cause of trauma. And that's the bottom line for me. So the right thing to do if we want to have a healthy and well population is to stop racism. And that's where we're coming from in this programme.
And that's the point where she drops the mic, as the gift would say. And I mean, there was so much within what you said that I don't think people fully appreciate. So there have been a number of studies by Harvard and other really well-respected institute like the Race Health Observatory that have defined a correlation between people's physical, mental health and well-being and their experience of adversity or trauma as a consequence of their ethnic heritage. It doesn't get talked about enough, as you know, this is really impacting individuals in a way that we don't fully appreciate or understand. But if we want to, as a health and care system, address some of those issues, then we need to work collaboratively together to address some of the causes, as well as addressing some of the manifestations as a consequence of that. The reason why it's pertinent and relevant, I suppose, for this conversation, as well as from a delivering services perspective, which I'll come to in a minute, is as women of diverse heritages, our experience of trauma will impact our ability to continue to be resilient. And when you're advocating for equality, inclusion, social justice, or just in a visible leadership role, just doing your job, sometimes your resilience and your ability to continue to bounce back will be impacted by the trauma that you experience and the way in which life impacts you on a day-to-day basis. So Kim, I'm going to come to you first, and I wanted to explore this with you through two lenses. One is through the lens of the CEO of an organisation that delivers a wide range of support to individuals who are dealing with significant, complex needs. But the second part is, as a lady from a diverse heritage background, who's in a senior leadership role, some of the experiences that you have on a day-to-day basis will impact your ability to continue to bounce back. And I can see your face going, where's she going with this? And the reason why I'm saying it is because I don't even think we consciously are aware of it. But I think our experiences and the journey that we've been on growing up and our experiences make us sometimes have a higher threshold for the pressure that we endure. So I was having a conversation with a colleague last night who was in a really difficult space and some really challenging things going on. And I was saying to him, I said, look, I think you need to take a step back. I think this is too difficult for you and you need to focus on yourself. And we were exploring together that actually, because of our heritage and the experiences that we've had growing up of adversity, etc., that we push ourselves that much harder. Because we feel like if we don't, that there's something lacking in us, which is why I wanted to explore it through both those lenses, if that makes sense. Big questions. She's like, ooh. I did warn you.
Big questions. probably do. So I'll take the last one first because I can remember it. So because I was probably pulling a face there because my brain was whirring and I was thinking, you know, so my mum's Chinese, she's from Malaysia, my dad's English. I have, you know, and even though I was born in Indonesia, I have mostly grown up in this country, and I am absolutely mindful that even though and you know, I'm not white, and I define myself as white. You know, I've lived a predominantly a privileged white privileged life. You know, that's the reality of my life. But I think I carry with me, and it's made a real huge difference to who I am, the learning and the resilience, and you know, and what my mum went through. You know, both as a Chinese person living in Malaysia, but then when she came over here when she was 18 to train to be a nurse with £40 in her pocket. So, you know, my dad has had his own journey, and that they've both had their trauma. So I think it's, you know, it's really made me who I am. Do I think that, yes, I have had plenty of racism fielded my way, and I think there's something about being of a mixed heritage that comes with its own, you know, challenges. And I've probably only thought more about that in recent years. Actually, I've just sort of, and that tells something about my privilege in itself. But I think, you know, it's been interesting, I think, because people sometimes choose to define you in a certain way, in one box or another. My position on it is I'll define myself how I want to define myself. Nobody has the right to tell me, you know, which box I might fit in. And unfortunately, because of some of the, you know, and I think some of this is caused by people's trauma. The tensions around some of that are really real, and they're very live and experienced all the time, and play out, you know, a lot in the sector that I work in and beyond. So that makes it difficult. Like, you know, that does affect my resilience. It is hard because you're always trying to do the right thing. We talked at the beginning about trying, you know, being our authentic self, trying to do our best every day, be driven by our values, but also recognize that we're all on a learning journey as well, and trying to do better. And I can't remember that quote, so you know, it's about like, when you know better, do better. You know, and you know, I feel like we're living in a time in the world at the moment where people are being less kind. Like I see that playing out in lots of different spaces, you know, and that, you know, and it is difficult when people are going through what they're going through, to be kind, and trying to ground yourself back in that is really important. The first bit of the question where you're asking me about my own workplace, I mean, you know, we're mental health charity in Bradford. You know, you know, when we work predominantly with people with a severe or enduring mental health problem. So that's why actually I don't think, I probably would say that we would never talk to the people we support about, come on, let's get more resilient. It just wouldn't feel it just wouldn't feel appropriate. We talk about like how do we to get alongside people, to, you know, to hold hope when people are really struggling to see the prospect of something brighter in their future, and then to support people to use their own assets, and that often comes from a place of huge resilience from what people have been through, to develop the tools, the confidence, the skills, or whatever that requires to help them move forward. And that's hardly ever linear, just because we're humans, aren't we? So yeah, the more I'm thinking about this, the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm thinking, oh, this resilience thing, I'm not really sure about it.
And that means that this conversation, this podcast is working, because that's the whole point of us exploring this today. Em, you wanted to come in as well.
I did, exactly on what Kim's just said around resilience. It is such a complex word, and the terminology that we use in this context is really important. So we've got some guidance out there around the language of trauma, because actually resilience makes it feel like it's individuals that have to do this. And actually this isn't individuals, this is society, this is a system, this is a history of a world that's created this. And actually that doesn't mean to say you have to be resilient, Kim, or you have to be resilient, Selina. And this bounce back, this, you know, or this pull your trousers up and carry on or whatever. Absolutely, you can't put that on people and on individuals, because they need to have the support, the right understanding, the right cultural approaches in place to help them understand their trauma, help them link their trauma. Some people don't even understand that trauma's happened to them, therefore they don't understand the biological and physiological and psychological impact it's had on them. And actually, if we keep saying resilience, 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 then we're ignoring the problem. We're brushing it under the carpet. What we need to be saying is, how are we supporting our population to cope and recover and discover what their life is beyond that trauma? Because a lot of what we feel in society is people that haven't been able to do that. And that's not because they've not chosen to. It's not because they don't want to let it go. And all of those phrases you hear, it's because they've never had the right support in place to really understand what's happened to them. And probably nobody's ever asked them that question. So I'm really, really strong on, we've got resilience in our title, and we have been talking for quite a long time about changing it to something completely different, because we recognise that that word can cause a lot of distress as much as it can be a healing word. So I think it's really important, the language in all of this as well, and the understanding that once you've experienced trauma, unless you get the help, it doesn't just go away. It just gets worse.
Yeah. But taking that first step to seek support requires real courage, doesn't it? And I don't think we always acknowledge that. And you know, the reason why I came up with the concept of this podcast was I was having a conversation with a senior leader who was calling out the fact that they were really tired of communities being asked to continue to be resilient, whether that's our workforce population, whether that's our communities. You know, the word just seems really tired, but also it's just loosely bandied about without any fully thought through consideration of the implications of the continuous toll that takes on our workforce or our people. Selina, you wanted to come in on this as well.
Yeah, I really liked what Em was saying, and I think you absolutely hit it on the head, really. I think the kind of leadership we need is, we talk about it, but actually living it. Compassionate leadership, you know, real compassion in the workplace, really making ourselves vulnerable as well, so that we're modeling that behavior, that actually it is okay to be vulnerable in the workplace. Actually really engaging and listening to people and hearing what they say, and you know, and responding to that, not just doing that performative stuff, or we engage, we've got a staff engagement session, yes, we heard you, we'll get back to you, you know, but actually in real time being able to do that. And I think we have the right words. We need to really enact it and live those words, and demonstrate that, and really be the embodiment of those words as leaders. Because if we can't do that bit, then actually we're failing in our leadership role. We have moved away from the old-fashioned strong leadership. You know, you just get on with it, you rally the troops and you take them to the top of the hill, and it doesn't matter what's at the end of the cliff, you go down it because the leader said so. That is gone. We need to take everybody with us in a compassionate way.
Oh, you've really stimulated the conversation now. Everybody wants to talk about it. But before I bring in Em, I just want to reflect on the Don that is Professor Michael West. So if you hear that man speak, first of all, he's got the most amazing voice. I mean, you should just listen to him just to hear him speak. His voice is so soothing. But he does talk about this in a real tangible way. And actually, I think his leadership and his teachings are more relevant now than ever. So there's a bit of a plug there to go and find Michael West and listen to what he's got to say about compassionate leadership. But also, we might explore that on a future podcast with you, Selina. So watch this space. Over to you.
Yeah, two things. One is what you were saying, Fatima, about being courageous to seek support. I think that's absolutely true for everybody. I think it's got different meanings for different cultures and different genders. However, we need to be in a society where people just get support and they don't have to seek it as well. And that's the compassion. That's where the compassion comes in. And then that leads me on to, this is all about relationships. It's all about relationships and belonging. And if people have those two anchors, then we can make a difference. So as leaders, we need to be building relationships with the people that we work with and lead. And we need to be giving them a space where they feel that they belong. And if we can do that, then we're one step closer. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I want to live in that world, I really want to live in that world. Kim, what are your thoughts?
What I was going to say is I 100% agree with Selina that compassionate leadership is exactly what we should do. What I'm going to disagree about is that the old style leadership has gone. I think we still see plenty of that old style leadership, and I think that sometimes that national policy, sometimes the national pressures drive a level of pressure and stress that then are not conducive for compassionate leadership. And it's very, very easy. It's human nature when we're under stress to revert into behaviours that not always our best selves. And I was doing a presentation for a load of charity leaders the other week, and there's a slide that I really like about, like, these leadership badges that we can wear. I don't need any help. I can cope without any sleep. I should be able to cope with everything. It doesn't matter if I work all these long hours. That's a sign of me being a good leader. And I still think it's really easy, including me, to sneak back into some of those behaviours. And also I think in crisis situations you sometimes go into like more of a command and control kind of leadership, and that which is is sort of the opposite. It's sort of the opposite. So I genuinely worry. I genuinely worry for our leaders at the moment that they're having to cope, and not just leaders, everybody, but I worry about our leaders falling over with burnout, because what is being asked of them is inhuman. Like, it is beyond what is reasonable capacity of even the most resilient, the best possible people. It's too much. So yeah, I think 100% compassionate leadership, we have to remind ourselves to do that, and take a step back and feel like it's okay, because sometimes in some areas that might still be seen as weaker leadership, and let's all come together to address that.
I completely agree, Kim, that I think it takes real courage and self-awareness to be your true authentic leader. And that sometimes is a different style of leadership to what people are used to, and it gets an interesting response depending on what sector or environment you operate in. But I think having role models like you and Em and Selina show the art of the possible and also the positive impact that it can have. But you also mentioned something that I wanted to sort of come to while we sort of work towards the end of this podcast, because the time's flown by and we're running out of time, folks. I could talk to you guys all day, but sadly you all have better things to do. You mentioned about the pressure and the expectation of leaders. You mentioned about the fact that the expectation and the toll on them is something that we could never have foreseen. And I feel like we've gone from COVID to the cost of living crisis to the workforce challenges to every time you turn on the news, something new has happened that is catastrophic, and people are having to dig deep again to continue. So I'm going to come to you first, about, firstly, how do leaders continue to navigate this space while maintaining their authentic selves? And again, linking back to the work that you do, but also on a slightly personal level, how do you look after yourself as a leader? What are your top tips for individuals watching this podcast who can really empathize and connect with what we've all discussed, but might need a few pointers on how to manage it?
Just, pulling together everything that all of you have said, is that we're a system that's in a constant state of fight or flight, which is trauma. The system is experiencing trauma, the world is experiencing trauma, and all the other trauma that everybody else has experienced is being heightened and triggered by everything that's going on around us. The only way we can work through that and pull, and I use the edge of a cliff all the time, Selina. I talk about us being a world on the edge of a cliff. And if we don't do something, yeah. The only way we can roll that back is by really understanding trauma, what trauma is, how it impacts on people, how it impacts on a system. It's not just individuals, it's communities, it's systems. And instead of talking about, let's have resilient communities, let's talk about how we understand the trauma of communities and how we strengthen and build on the assets of those communities so they feel they belong and that they have the relationships to be able to recover and cope with what life throws at them. My top tip is for everybody across West Yorkshire to be trauma informed and to really start to understand this process, because for me, as a public health specialist, this is the biggest public health issue we're facing at the moment and underpins so much of what we see in every sector across the system. And it's the only way that we can really start to heal and help people heal from what's happened and what is happening now. Because what we will see is the trauma that we're experiencing collectively in the world will continue to raise all that historical and intergenerational trauma. I'm going to stop because you might be hearing a train announcement.
I mean, that's how we roll, isn't it? We are able to repivot in challenging times and dial into conversations no matter where we are in the country. And you just show us how it's done, Em. So thank you for that. Selina, I wanted to sort of come to you to talk a little bit about what Em's just reflected on, but also as a leader that I've always admired, to seek a little bit of insight on how you manage to continue to stay fabulous in these really challenging and difficult times.
Yeah, thanks. I think trauma-informed work is absolutely critical. I lead a mental health learning disabilities children's trust. That's what we're doing. We're really, trying to embed trauma-informed practice in everything that we do. We need to look at what we're doing in through that lens. So very much wholeheartedly agree on that. As a person of colour, who grew up in a city council estate, facing packy bashing and skinheads and all of that was part of my growing up. So that trauma is something that I've carried with me, and I've had family incidences and various other things which have happened to me as individuals. So I recognize that as a human being, I've probably got layers of trauma that I'm carrying, and for the first time, I have the confidence to actually say trauma. I remember in a family conversation a few months back, I actually said, "Oh, we've got trauma in the family." This was my siblings, and they were like, you can see the shutters going down and thinking, what the hell is she talking about? And I said, look, all our life experiences, if we look at it, we have trauma, and we need to acknowledge it. So I think a lot of people don't acknowledge it. They think that having trauma means that somehow there's a problem to fix. It isn't about fixing it or that you're damaged or that you need help. This is about recognizing your own makeup. And to be good leaders, I believe that we need to understand the various layers that we have in order to be our authentic self, in order to be able to bring our whole self to work, and in order to be able to respond and build those relationships that are so critical in the workplace and personally, so that we can have those healthy relationships with people. So on the broad tech, how do I do it? I need to find time for myself, and that's how I charge myself and reflect on myself. So it's very much about creating some time for myself and listening to music and doing whatever people need that energizes them. I don't need people to energize me. I need to be alone to energize me. So that's what I do.
Thank you so much for sharing so much of your personal journey and the lived experience of you and your family. I'm sure that anyone listening or watching would really, really appreciate that. And I think sort of the level of self-awareness that you demonstrate just by the way you framed it, I think is really important as a leader, and a leadership attribute is, we talk about how people experience you. within the workplace, and that level of self-awareness is crucial to that. Kim, are you someone that likes being alone and listening to music? Is that how you spend your time to recharge? What works for you?
So I'm an extrovert by nature, so normally being around people is the thing that energizes me, and it, you know, that links to my point, is noticing when you're not doing okay is that you wouldn't do the things that you usually do. So recently, when I've been feeling that I've become, you know, more burnt out, I've spent less time with people. I thought, oh, you know what, I'm not making those arrangements to see my friends. You know, I'm more likely to go home and just want to, you know, have a good nap on whatever. So I think there's something about noticing when you're not doing the things that you know actually help you to stay well is really important. You know, I'm never going to be on this podcast to say that I have cracked this. Absolutely not. I can stand up and do a whole presentation on mental health and leadership. Have I cracked it? No, I haven't. So reminding yourself and revisiting it is really, really important. And then just looking at what your cues, your personal cues might be when things are like starting to go down. I'm lucky that I've got a senior team that know me really well and can be a bit like, oh dear. You know, and we've had some good conversations as a leadership team saying, you know, this is how you will notice when I'm not doing too well, and find compassionate ways to have those conversations. So now I can, you know, my deputy can say, oh, which version of you am I speaking to today? And that's okay, because we've had that like compassionate conversation about that, and I can go, yes, okay. So I think that's important. You know, I am a big advocate of coaching. I'm a big advocate of therapy. I recognise that comes with a lot of privilege to be able to access those things. But I suppose I wanted to say that there is literally no shame in accessing those things, whatever, whoever you are, because sometimes people can think that getting help and asking for help is a weakness. Obviously, I would say that there are people, there are organisations like my own, like, you know, and that are there to help people. And you know, it is scary to reach out for help, but you know, there are organisations there across our partnership and beyond. And then lastly, I would say peer support is absolutely fundamental for me. I'm geeky about peer support in all aspects of you know, of my work, but if I didn't have the peer support of fellow leaders, colleagues, etc., whether that's just being able to ring somebody up and have a bit of a rant, or send a funny like WhatsApp or a GIF or whatever just to cheer up your day, like I couldn't survive without that. Those are the things that keep me going.
I mean, there's one thing that you just said that reminded me of the latest Michelle Obama book, where she talks about people at her table or her tribe. And you know, she's got like a network of people that are like the people that are at the table, and she goes to them as and when she needs to for the support that you've described. So you're in good company, Kim, is what I'm saying.
Find your tribe to support
find your
you.
tribe.
You know, there's an amazing woman called Ashley who I met, who runs an amazing little organisation called Mums on a Mission, and she was like, find your tribe who have your vibe. I love that. Like, yeah, you know, people.
There's a hashtag there, Kim. There's a hashtag.
Yeah.
Is that your vibe? Do you find your tribe that have your vibe? Is that how you roll?
Absolutely. You know, you've all just said it again. It's relationships. It is relationships. They are the healing part of this. And for me, my friendships, my family, my colleagues at work, that again, just like you, Kim, can recognise when, you know, I had somebody say to me the other day, you've not got any of your meetings in your diary. What are you doing? You need to put them back in, you know, and they recognise it for you. So it is relationships. It really is fundamentally at the heart of all of this.
I mean, there's a lady that some of you will have heard of called Maddie Hoskin. And when I was really struggling with volumes of work, she gave me some really good advice, which was diarise thinking time. And she goes, what you do is you put it in the diary, and then she goes, go and do something really mundane, like load the dishwasher, put a load of laundry on, or do some folding. And I was like, oh my God, you can't do that in work time. She goes, no, she goes, what you don't realise is that your brain is doing its filing while you're doing something really mundane. So actually you are still thinking, you are still working, but you're giving your brain the chance to change gears and to deal with some of the stuff that's been going on during the day. And I don't think we fully appreciate that. We sometimes think that to be productive at work means you have to do all the time. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've discovered, is actually, no, sometimes just thinking and doing something a bit different is important too. So we're coming to the end of our time together, and I remember sort of saying to you at the beginning, oh, I don't think this is going to take too long, but we've gone through an hour in a blink of an eye. So clearly we had lots more to discuss and more to cover than we've got time for, sadly. But I think there are some really, really important messages in what you've all just shared about acknowledging sometimes that life or work can be really, really challenging, that it's not about being able to fix everything, and to recognize that, and to know when things are within your control and not within your control, about the importance of learning more about the work of being trauma informed. And Em and colleagues in West Yorkshire are doing a phenomenal job with that. I'm proud to be supporting them in a small capacity, but the work that they're doing is absolutely incredible. And please do find out more. There is also something that I think we don't always fully appreciate about leadership, which is that level of self-awareness of what does it feel like to be on the receiving end of you, or in Kim's definition, what version of Kim were you getting today? How does that feel? And then there's also something about recognizing the different facets that make us the leader that we are. So when we're coming into the workplace, you can't compact the fact that you are a Muslim woman, or that you're living with a disability, or that you have caring responsibilities, etc. And it's really important to acknowledge and recognize when you're not okay. So, you know, they're all really important, I think, leadership messages in this context. I mean, I love the fact that we have to recognize that not everyone recharges in the same way, and there's lots of resources online that you can find out to really support yourself when you are feeling overwhelmed. But I love the music. Music really supports me too. I am someone who has come to the conclusion now that although I am an extrovert, I do need time on my own. And that has been a real discovery for me. I was like, no, I need to be around people. It's like, no, I don't. Actually, I do need to be on my own. I need my brain to rest. I've not got to the point where naps have helped me, although I did read an audiobook by Claudia Winkleman, who really recommends napping in the afternoon, and that's really good for your health and well-being. So I might give that a go, Kim. Thanks for that. I think find your tribe that share your vibe is a definite hashtag that we need to consider moving forward, but also finding creative outlets as well. So cooking, the drawing, the sewing, the crafting, and relationships are absolutely crucial. And I'm really fortunate to have relationships with you, Selina, with you, Kim, and Em, who sadly had to dial out from our London studios. But I want to say thank you to all of you for your time, your openness, your honesty. And I hope that people watching or listening have really found this conversation useful. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, Fatima.